3 very creepy, alone travel at night horror stories. There are roads that do not exist on maps. Roads that should not be traveled. Kendra did not know she had taken one of them. She had been driving for hours. The glow of the city was far behind her now, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the countryside. The road ahead stretched endlessly, cutting through dense, suffocating forest. Her GPS had rerouted her onto this unfamiliar highway, promising it was the fastest way home. She had never heard of it before, but she trusted the calm, robotic voice. Without question. Now, she regretted it. Something was wrong. The road was cracked and uneven, flanked by towering trees that loomed like silent watchers. There were no signs, no mile markers, no headlights approaching from the opposite direction. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She had not seen another car in over an hour. Her phone, no signal. The isolation pressed in, the kind that made her skin crawl. Then, a flicker, a shadow at the edge of her high beams. Kendra's heart slammed into her ribs. She hit the brakes. Tires screeched, the car jerking to a sudden stop. A man was standing in the middle of the road. He did not move. His clothes were tattered, hanging from his thin frame like they had been worn for years. His head was tilted slightly, as if listening to something beyond the trees. Kendra's pulse pounded in her ears. She honked. Once, twice, no reaction. Her breath caught. What was he doing out here? Was he lost? Hurt? But if he needed help, why was he just standing there? Her shaky fingers reached for the lock button. Click. Then he moved. Not like a person should. His body flickered. An unnatural shift, like a shadow twisting under a dying light. Kendra's stomach dropped. Her vision blurred. For a second she felt dizzy, like reality itself had glitched. Then he stepped forward. No. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. She had to go. Her trembling fingers grabbed the gear shift. She was about to throw it into reverse when… darkness. The headlights went out. The engine sputtered. Died. Everything gone. Kendra sat frozen in the suffocating blackness, the kind so thick it swallowed everything. She could not breathe. Then, tap. Software deliberate, against her window. Her entire body locked. The night was too dark to see anything, but she could feel it. Something was there. Tap. Passenger side. Her breath hitched. He moved. She had not heard footsteps. Then a whisper. Faint, close, almost inside her ear. Get out. A sob caught in her throat. She clenched her hands into fists, forcing herself to stay still. Do not move. Do not look. The silence stretched, long, oppressive, unbearable. Then, the headlights flickered back on. The road was empty. He was gone. Her chest heaved as she twisted the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. She did not hesitate. The tires screamed as she floored it. She drove and drove and drove, not looking back, not checking the mirrors, not stopping. Then a gas station, a mirage of light in the endless dark. She barely pulled into the lot before she shoved the car into park and threw open the door, her legs unsteady beneath her. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed. The air smelled of cheap coffee and gasoline. A man stood behind the counter, older, with deep-set eyes that had seen too much. Kendra stumbled inside, the bell chiming softly. The man's gaze settled on her pale face. You all right, miss? Her breath was unsteady. I just need a minute. He nodded slowly. Restroom is in the back. She rushed to the sink, gripping the edges with trembling hands, staring at her own wide-eyed reflection. She was safe now. Was she? Her fingers dug into the cold porcelain. She splashed water on her face, forced her breathing to slow. It was over. Was it? She swallowed hard and walked back to the counter, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. Her hand still shook as she set it down. The man scanned it slowly. His eyes flickered toward the window. Then he looked at her again. You took the old highway, did you not? Her heart skipped. She hesitated. Yes, my GPS took me that way." The man exhaled. "You are lucky." A chill ran through her. "Lucky." He leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped lower. "People see things on that road." Kendra's stomach tightened. He watched her carefully. Things. That should not be there. Her fingers curled against the counter. The man glanced toward the darkness outside, then back to her. "Years ago, a man was hit by a truck on that highway. The driver swerved to avoid him, but the guy never moved, just stood there, watching." Kendra's breath shallowed. The man's voice lowered. "But the strange thing, that was not the first time people saw him." Her skin turned cold. The man tapped a finger against the counter. "No matter how many times people report him, he is never there when they check." Kendra's hands tightened into fists. "But every so often, someone drives that road at night, and they see him." Her pulse pounded. The man inhaled sharply. Then he said it. "They say, if your car stalls near him," a pause, "and you hear him tap on your window," a beat, his voice barely above a whisper, "do not look." The room felt smaller. Kendra's throat dried. Slowly she turned toward the parking lot. Her car sat beneath the buzzing lights. But beyond it, the darkness was endless. Her breath shuddered. She had never checked the back seat. A slow, creeping chill slithered down her spine. She turned back to the man. His face had drained of color. His eyes were locked onto something behind her. Then, tap, against the glass door. Kendra did not turn around. She knew she was not alone. And this time, she had nowhere left to run. This is very scariest. Alone travel at night horror story number 2. Some roads should never be traveled alone at night. They stretch through the darkness, quiet, empty, but not truly empty, because something watches. It waits in the silence, hidden between the trees, just beyond the reach of headlights. And once it notices you, it does not look away. Liana never should have taken that detour. But by the time she realized the truth, it was already too late. The highway had been closed, some accident up ahead. Her GPS rerouted her through an unfamiliar stretch of road, cutting through miles of dense forest. At first, she barely thought about it. It was just another road, dark, isolated, but nothing unusual. Then, she realized something. It had been nearly 30 minutes, and she had not seen a single car. Her hands tightened around the wheel. The road stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by shadows. No streetlights, no signs, just emptiness. A cold unease crept over her. She exhaled, forcing herself to focus. It was fine. She would be back on the main road soon. Then, her headlights flickered. Liana's heart skipped. She swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the dashboard. The car hummed beneath her, steady, unbothered. Still, something felt off. The road curved ahead, bending sharply through the trees. And that was when she saw him. A figure, standing on the shoulder of the road. She inhaled sharply, her hands clenching the wheel. He was just barely visible in the glow of her headlights, tall, thin, unmoving. His clothes hung loose, tattered, like he had been walking for hours. A wave of dread rolled through her. There were no houses out here, no gas stations, no cars. So what was he doing here? Her foot hovered over the brake. Then he moved, not forward, not toward her, sideways, fast, too fast. Her breath hitched, and he was gone, just gone. She blinked, her pulse hammering. The trees loomed ahead, their shadows deep and swallowing. The road was empty again. Liana's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. Had she imagined it? Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the wheel. Then her radio crackled. A sharp burst of static, loud, violent. Liana jumped, her heart slamming against her ribs. Then, beneath the static, a voice, a whisper. "Do not stop." She sucked in a breath, her fingers fumbling for the radio dial. But before she could turn it off, the whispering continued. Low, distorted, crawling into her ears like something just behind her. "He watches. Do not let him in." Her stomach twisted. She yanked the radio off, plunging the car into silence. but it did not feel empty. It felt watched. Her breathing came shallow, unsteady. Then she saw it. A shadow. In her rearview mirror. Every muscle in her body locked. Something was in her back seat. Liana did not move, did not breathe. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Slowly, carefully, her eyes flicked toward the mirror again. Nothing. The seat was empty, but the feeling did not go away. Her fingers clenched the wheel, knuckles white. Do not stop. Do not look back. The road stretched on, endless and suffocating. She needed to get out of here. Now then, finally, a light. A gas station. Liana's breath hitched. Relief crashed over her as she pressed the gas, speeding toward it. The building sat alone at the forest's edge, a flickering neon sign buzzing weakly against the night. She pulled in fast, throwing the car into park. Her hands shook as she climbed out, the cold air hitting her like a slap. Inside, the attendant stood behind the counter, his wrinkled hands resting on the surface. He was old, weathered, with deep-set eyes that flicked to her, then to the road behind her. His expression darkened. "You drove that road?" His voice was low. Liana swallowed. Yes, the highway was closed and my GPS." "You saw him." Her stomach dropped. She stared at him, her throat dry. The man sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You should not have stopped." "I did not." Her voice was barely above a whisper. He studied her for a long moment. Then quietly, "They always do." Liana's breath came shallow. Her skin prickled. Then a sound. The soft creak of a door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She turned slowly. The gas station's automatic door was sliding open, on its own. The lot outside was empty. The night stretched out, still and waiting. Then she saw it. The security monitor. Her breath caught in her throat. The grainy black and white feed showed the gas station entrance, and just beyond the frame of the door, he was there, standing perfectly still, watching. Liana's blood ran ice cold. She could not move, could not breathe. The attendant's voice was barely a whisper. "You should not have looked." This is very disturbing. Alone travel at night. Horror story number 3. The road stretched endlessly before me, swallowed by the darkness beyond my headlights. The night was still, too still. Not even the wind stirred the trees. Something about the silence felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath, waiting. Then, just beyond the reach of my headlights, something moved. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. It was supposed to be a quick drive home. A 2-hour journey on a mostly deserted highway, cutting through miles of open land. I had driven this route countless times before, but tonight felt different. The first hour was uneventful. The road was empty, save for the occasional pair of headlights appearing in my rearview mirror before disappearing into the night. But then, as I passed the last gas station for miles, my radio crackled and cut to static. Strange. I reached for my phone, but the signal was gone, completely dead. A chill crept up my spine. I shook it off. It was just a dead zone. Nothing unusual. But then, the road changed. The asphalt, once smooth, now looked cracked and worn, like it had not been maintained in years. The faded white lines seemed off, uneven, warped. My headlights flickered, just for a second, but long enough to send a jolt of fear through my chest. I glanced in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. My heart slowed a little. Another traveler. I was not alone after all. The car behind me was distant, but it was gaining. The headlights burned brighter, too bright. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the lights vanished. I blinked. My pulse pounded in my ears. Where did they go? I checked my mirrors. Nothing. Only darkness. I exhaled sharply. Maybe they had turned off. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But then, a shadow flickered at the edge of my high beams. A figure stood on the side of the road. I barely had time to react. I swerved, my tires screeching as I struggled to regain control. My breath came in ragged gasps as my car steadied. My heart hammered against my ribs. I gripped the wheel and forced myself to look back. Nothing. No one. I swallowed hard. I could have sworn I saw someone. Tall, motionless, standing at the edge of the road, just outside the reach of my headlights. I pressed my foot down on the gas, trying to shake the unease twisting in my gut. But no matter how far I drove, the feeling did not fade. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. The road felt endless. Then, up ahead, another figure. My breath caught in my throat. It was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my car skidding to a halt. My hands trembled as I stared at the figure illuminated by my headlights. It was not moving. The air inside my car felt thick, suffocating. My instinct screamed at me to drive now, but I could not move. Then, it tilted its head. Not like a person would. The motion was unnatural. Too sharp. Too sudden. I gripped the gear shift, my knuckles white. My foot hovered over the accelerator. The figure took a step forward. That was enough. I slammed my foot down. The tires spun, screeching against the pavement. My car lurched forward, right through the spot where the figure had been standing. But there was nothing there. My body was shaking. My breaths came too fast, too shallow. I checked my mirrors. Empty road. Then, just as I began to believe it was over, knock. My blood turned to ice. Knock. The sound came from the back of my car. Knock. Slow. Deliberate. Like something, was letting me know it was still there. I did not dare look in the mirror. My foot pressed harder on the gas. The car roared forward, the speedometer climbing. Faster. Faster. I needed to get out of here. The knocking stopped. I risked a glance in the mirror. And that was when I saw it. A face. Pale. Hollow eyes locked onto mine. It was inside the car. I screamed. The world tilted as I lost control. My car spun, tires screeching against the asphalt. The headlights blurred as trees rushed toward me. Then, darkness. I woke up to the sound of distant sirens. Cold night air bit at my skin. My car was wrecked, crumpled against a tree. My hands trembled as I pushed myself up. My body ached, but I was alive. But something was wrong. The road. It looked normal again. Smooth asphalt, clear white lines. My phone buzzed beside me, full signal restored. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? The flashing lights of an approaching ambulance illuminated the road. Relief flooded my chest. Then I saw them. Figures, standing just beyond the trees, silent, watching. As the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, I forced myself to look away, to focus on the real world. But as I was wheeled into the ambulance, I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock on the window. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The pale face stared back at me, hollow eyes filled with something I could not understand. The door slammed shut. The ambulance pulled away. But I knew the truth. I was not alone. I never had been.